A man stops on a frozen Wyoming highway. His engine is running, his door is open, his clothes are scattered on the ground. Then he vanishes into empty prairie and is never seen again. No crash, no struggle, no confirmed sightings, only footprints leading to nowhere, a deserted barn, and decades of unanswered records. What happened to Donald Kemp inside America's so-called red zone, and why has no one ever found the truth? The off-ramp, with the door still open. On Tuesday, the 16th of November, 1982, a Carbon County, Wyoming deputy driving patrol along Interstate 80 came onto an off-ramp that led down toward the Wagon Hound rest area. Near the end of that ramp, a vehicle sat stopped in the intersection where the ramp met the service road. The driver's side door was open. Items that looked like clothing lay on the ground beside it. The engine was still running when the deputy approached, and no one was inside. The vehicle was later described as a Chevrolet Blazer, with personal belongings packed inside, including food and clothes. Reports from the time and later television coverage both focused on the same basic elements at the scene: a running vehicle, an open door, scattered clothing, and the absence of the driver. The deputy called the situation in and requested assistance. Within a short time, more deputies arrived, and the area around the off-ramp became the starting point of a search. A single set of footprints led away from the vehicle and out into the prairie north of the road. The prints were described as solitary, with no second track alongside them, and they were visible enough in the light snow for searchers to follow. That detail shaped the first hours of the response. Searchers stayed on the line of those prints rather than sweeping in multiple directions, because the tracks offered a clear route away from the highway. The missing driver was identified as Paul Donald Kemp Jr., commonly referred to as Donald Kemp. Contemporary reporting, and later retellings, describe him as 35 years old and originally from Maryland, with professional experience in advertising in the East. In the days before the incident, he had been traveling west. The last confirmed contact, described in later coverage, was a phone call he made from Cheyenne, Wyoming, after spending time at a museum there. The physical setting around Wagon Hound is open and sparse. The rest area sits off a major interstate, but once a person leaves the pavement, the landscape becomes wide prairie, broken by ranch property lines, fencing, draws, and occasional outbuildings. In November, daylight hours shorten and temperatures drop quickly after afternoon. Wind across open ground becomes an important factor, even when snowfall is light. Weather records from that exact morning are often discussed as incomplete in later commentary, but the presence of snow, sufficient to hold clear prints, is consistently mentioned. Carbon County's law enforcement resources at the time were limited by geography. The county's population was relatively small compared to its land area, and deputies covered long distances between towns and highway corridors. In the initial phase of this incident, there was also no missing person report already filed, because the vehicle was found before anyone called in a disappearance. The search that began at Wagon Hound was therefore reactive and immediate, built around what was present at the scene rather than around a prepared profile or timeline. Searchers followed the footprints for several miles north. One account states the distance as about 4 miles from the vehicle to an abandoned barn. Inside that building, items were reported that did not fit with a simple roadside stop. Sources mention socks believed to belong to Kemp, and sticks arranged in a way that suggested preparation for a fire, though it was not described as lit. An orange teapot is also mentioned as an item associated with the track line in some reporting. Whether the teapot was found along the route or grouped with other belongings varies depending on the source, but it appears repeatedly as one of the odd objects tied to the first day's search. The barn itself became important for a specific reason. There were no clear tracks leading away from it. Searchers had a continuous line of prints from the highway to that structure, and then, at the point where they expected the route to continue, there was nothing. Some explanations offered later by investigators and observers include the possibility of shallower snow beyond the building or wind removing surface detail. In the first day reporting, the absence of outgoing tracks was treated as a practical problem. It removed the only obvious direction of travel. An airplane was used during the early search, with at least one deputy flying overhead to scan the prairie while ground personnel stayed with the track line. The idea was straightforward. If a person was moving across open ground, or if clothing or gear created contrast against snow and grass, an aerial scan could cover more area than patrol vehicles and foot searchers. Later commentary notes that Kemp did not signal the plane, and deputies later expressed confidence that he was not visible in the area at the time of the search. though those assessments became a point of dispute in the years that followed. Even the identity of the first responding officer became slightly muddled in public retellings. Contemporary accounts named Deputy Larry Szabo as the officer who found the vehicle. A later television episode used the name Randy Teeters while describing the discovery. The difference is usually attributed to production choices and interview availability, rather than to a formal contradiction in the underlying event, but it created an early example of how the record of the incident could shift depending on which source an audience encountered first. By the end of the first day, the basic facts remained fixed and narrow. Kemp's vehicle was located near Wagonhound, off I-80, with the engine running and the door open. Clothing and personal items were present at the scene. A single set of footprints led north into the prairie. That track line reached a barn several miles away where items were found, including socks, and where a small arrangement of sticks suggested someone had considered making a fire. Beyond that point, the trail stopped in a way searchers could not confidently resolve. The official response moved forward from those details, but the first day offered no clear explanation for why a person would leave a running vehicle in that particular location and walk away with so much still inside. The incident began as a roadside discovery and shifted into a missing person search without a confirmed destination, a confirmed direction beyond the barn, or a clear reason for the departure. The scene at the off-ramp stayed as the only fixed anchor point, as deputies and later volunteers tried to map meaning onto a set of physical traces that did not continue. Cheyenne records and a short phone call. Travel through southeastern Wyoming in the early 1980s followed a predictable rhythm. Long-distance drivers entered Cheyenne from the east, refueled, rested briefly, and continued west along Interstate 80. The city functioned as a practical pause point rather than a destination. For most travelers, it offered services, shelter, and communication before the open stretches of prairie and mountain foothills resumed. Paul Donald Kemp Jr. moved through this system in the same way thousands of others did that year. Documentation places Kemp in Cheyenne during the second week of November 1982. His presence appears in several independent records that were later reviewed by investigators and journalists. These records include visitor logs, telephone billing information, and partial financial data. None of them indicate prolonged stays or unusual activity. They show brief, functional stops consistent with routine travel. One verified location associated with Kemp is the Wyoming State Museum. The museum, located near the state capitol building, maintained a guest register that visitors could sign voluntarily. According to later reports, Kemp wrote his name in this register. Staff members interviewed years later recalled that many travelers stopped at the museum while passing through, especially those interested in regional history and geography. The museum's exhibits, at that time, focused on frontier settlement, mineral resources, Native American history, and wildlife. Visitors typically spent between 30 minutes and 2 hours inside. There is no indication that Kemp remained there longer than average. No staff member recalled extended conversations or requests for assistance. After leaving the museum, Kemp placed a telephone call to his mother in Maryland. This call is one of the last confirmed personal communications associated with him. Family members stated that the conversation was brief and followed established patterns. He described his location and mentioned continuing west. His voice was reported as calm and ordinary. Telephone company records later confirmed that a call was placed from Cheyenne to his family's home during this period. The records did not preserve the precise location of the phone. In 1982, most long-distance travelers relied on payphones located in gas stations, restaurants, shopping centers, and motel lobbies. Investigators were unable to determine which facility he used. Following the call, Kemp continued westward. Credit card documentation shows at least one fuel purchase west of Cheyenne. The transaction amount matched typical refueling for a mid-sized sport utility vehicle. There were no reports of payment disputes, declined cards, or emergency service requests connected to the purchase. No confirmed motel receipt places Kemp in Cheyenne overnight. Some establishments kept paper logs that were later discarded. Others used early electronic systems that did not retain detailed archives. Investigators contacted several motels along major corridors, but no definitive match was found. It remains unclear whether he stayed overnight in the city or continued driving. Family members later stated that Kemp often drove long distances without stopping for extended rest. On previous trips, he sometimes slept briefly in his vehicle or made short motel stops that went unrecorded. This behavior was considered normal within his travel habits. and did not cause immediate concern. Kemp's employment background included advertising and media-related work in the eastern United States. Former colleagues described him as organized and methodical. He was accustomed to scheduling appointments, managing deadlines, and coordinating travel. These descriptions were consistent across multiple interviews conducted years apart. Personal items found later in his vehicle included clothing, packaged food, maps, and travel supplies. The selection suggested ongoing travel rather than preparation for stopping permanently. Road atlases showed wear consistent with repeated use. Some pages were marked with small folds, indicating frequently referenced sections. Banking records from this period were reviewed during the investigation. Withdrawals and credit card usage matched ordinary travel expenses. There were no large cash withdrawals, account closures, or unusual transfers. Financial activity did not suggest planning for disappearance or severing personal connections. Law enforcement agencies later contacted individuals who may have interacted with Kemp in Cheyenne. Museum staff, fuel station attendants, and motel employees were interviewed where possible. Most interactions were brief and routine. None of the witnesses reported agitation, confusion, or distress. One museum employee recalled that Kemp asked a general question about regional history displays. The question was consistent with casual interest and did not stand out at the time. Such exchanges were common with visitors passing through the area. After leaving Cheyenne, Kemp traveled along Interstate 80 toward Rawlins. This section of highway passes through Laramie and several small service areas. In November, some roadside businesses operated reduced hours. Nighttime traffic was lighter than in summer months, but remained steady due to freight transport. Weather records from mid-November indicate fluctuating conditions. Clear periods alternated with light snow and wind. Pavement conditions changed rapidly, particularly in open areas. Drivers often adjusted schedules in response to these conditions, stopping unexpectedly or continuing longer than planned. No traffic citations, accident reports, or mechanical service records place Kemp along this corridor during the relevant period. Highway patrol logs from that week do not mention his vehicle. Tow companies and roadside assistance providers reported no calls associated with his registration. The distance from Cheyenne to the Wagon Hound area is approximately 100 miles. Under favorable conditions, the drive requires about 2 hours. Weather delays could extend travel time, especially at night. Investigators could not determine whether Kemp completed the drive in a single stretch or stopped briefly along the way. Family members later stated that they expected further communication once he reached his next major destination. When no call occurred, concern developed gradually. At the time, long gaps between updates were common for travelers relying on payphones. Review of this stage of Kemp's movements revealed no clear disruptions. The museum visit, telephone call, fuel purchase, and continued westward travel followed established patterns. None of the available records indicated conflict, confusion, or emergency. Personal correspondence found later among his belongings contained routine letters and notes unrelated to the trip. There were no farewell messages or statements of intent. Friends reported that he had spoken casually about future plans before leaving Maryland. Investigators noted that the Cheyenne segment of the journey offered multiple opportunities for assistance if needed. Medical facilities, law enforcement offices, and commercial services were readily available. There is no evidence that Kemp sought help from any of these resources. By the time his vehicle was discovered near Wagon Hound, the confirmed record narrowed sharply. After leaving Cheyenne, no verified sightings placed him at specific businesses, rest areas, or checkpoints. His exact movements during the final hours remain undocumented. What remains from this portion of the timeline is a limited set of confirmed activities. He visited the Wyoming State Museum. He contacted his family by phone. He purchased fuel west of the city. He continued along Interstate 80. These entries form the last documented sequence before the roadside discovery. The long corridor between service signs. Interstate 80 between Cheyenne and Rawlins forms one of the longest uninterrupted highway stretches in southern Wyoming. The road crosses open prairie, low ridges, and shallow drainage basins, with few towns and limited commercial development. In 1982, this section functioned primarily as a transit corridor. Most travelers entered it with full fuel tanks and limited expectations of services ahead. From Cheyenne, westbound traffic passed first through Laramie, the only major population center along the route. Laramie supported several motels, gas stations, restaurants, and repair shops. Beyond that point, the highway entered a region characterized by wide spacing between exits. Service signs became infrequent. Lighting was minimal outside urban areas. State transportation maps from the early 1980s show that rest areas along this corridor were sparse. The Wagon Hound Rest Area, located between Laramie and Rawlins, was one of the few designated stopping points. It provided parking, restrooms, and limited shelter. It did not offer fuel, food, or overnight accommodation. Traffic volume studies from the Wyoming Department of Transportation indicate that this segment of Interstate 80 carried a steady flow of commercial trucks and private vehicles year-round. In November, recreational traffic declined, while freight transport remained consistent. Long-haul truck drivers formed a significant portion of nighttime traffic. Weather along this corridor was highly variable. National Weather Service records show that mid-November often brought alternating periods of clear skies, light snow, and strong crosswinds. Wind speeds exceeding 30 miles per hour were not uncommon. These conditions affected visibility, fuel efficiency, and vehicle handling. Snow accumulation during this period was usually shallow but uneven. Wind redistributed snowfall across open ground, creating patches of exposed grass and compacted drifts. On road surfaces, plowing operations focused on maintaining traffic flow rather than removing all accumulation. Ice frequently formed in shaded areas and near bridges. Highway patrol logs from November 1982 document multiple weather-related advisories along Interstate 80. Reduced speed recommendations and temporary warnings were issued when wind or snow increased. No extended closures were recorded for the Cheyenne to Rawlins segment during the days surrounding Kemp's disappearance. Roadside assistance infrastructure in this region was limited. Tow companies operated primarily out of Laramie and Rawlins. Response times could exceed 1 hour for incidents occurring between those towns. Cellular telephones were not in common use, and emergency communication relied on payphones or direct contact with passing motorists. Emergency call boxes were not widely installed along this stretch at the time. Travelers experiencing mechanical problems typically walked to the nearest rest area, flagged down another driver, or waited inside their vehicle. During cold or windy conditions, remaining inside a running vehicle was common. The Wagon Hound area itself occupied a transitional zone between developed highway infrastructure and open rangeland. The rest area sat slightly north of the main roadway, connected by a short access road. Nearby land was primarily used for cattle grazing. Fencing and dirt tracks marked property boundaries. County land records show that several abandoned or rarely used agricultural structures existed north of the highway near Wagon Hound. These included barns, sheds, and corrals dating from earlier ranching operations. Some were still accessible in 1982, though many were deteriorating. Vehicle accident reports from Carbon County for that period indicate that most incidents involved weather-related loss of control or wildlife collisions. None of the reports from mid-November mentioned Kemp's Chevrolet Blazer. No abandoned or disabled vehicles matching his registration were recorded prior to the discovery. Fuel consumption records suggest that a properly functioning Blazer could easily travel from Cheyenne to Rawlins on a single tank. Kemp's documented fuel purchase west of Cheyenne was consistent with completing that distance without refueling. Mechanical inspection after the vehicle was recovered did not reveal major defects. Highway rest patterns in this region often followed a predictable structure. Drivers stopped in Laramie or Rawlins for extended breaks and used Wagon Hound primarily for brief restroom stops. Overnight parking at Wagon Hound was permitted, but not common in winter months due to exposure to wind. Truck driver logbooks from companies operating in the area during that period describe Wagon Hound as a short stop rather than a layover point. Most commercial drivers preferred facilities with food and enclosed spaces. Private travelers sometimes used the area for short naps. Lighting at the Wagon Hound rest area in 1982 was limited to pole-mounted fixtures near the parking section. Areas beyond the paved lot were unlit. At night, visibility dropped sharply outside the immediate vicinity of the facilities. Carbon County Sheriff reports note that deputies patrolled this segment of Interstate 80 regularly, but at wide intervals. Coverage depended on call volume and staffing levels. During night hours, a single deputy might cover dozens of miles of roadway. The absence of nearby residences or businesses meant that unusual roadside activity could go unnoticed for extended periods. A stopped vehicle might remain undetected unless another motorist reported it or a patrol unit passed by. Interviews with long-term residents, conducted years later, describe this corridor as quiet and isolated, especially in winter. Traffic noise was continuous, but human presence away from the pavement was minimal. Individuals walking away from the highway would quickly move out of view. Search and rescue records indicate that locating missing persons in this region was difficult even under favorable conditions. The lack of natural landmarks, combined with variable snow cover, limited tracking efforts. Wind frequently erased surface signs within hours. Maps used by law enforcement at the time relied on printed topographic sheets and highway diagrams. GPS technology was not available. Position estimates were based on mile markers, exit numbers, and visual reference points. Mile markers between Cheyenne and Rawlins were spaced at regular intervals, but many were difficult to see during snow or low light. Patrol reports often described locations in relation to rest areas or nearby ranch entrances, rather than precise coordinates. Commercial radio communications along this stretch were inconsistent. Some truckers used citizens' band radios to share weather updates. Law enforcement relied on regional dispatch systems that sometimes experienced signal interference. During mid-November, daylight hours were limited. Sunset occurred in the late afternoon. By early evening, temperatures dropped rapidly. Wind chill values frequently fell below freezing, even when air temperatures were slightly above. For travelers unprepared for extended exposure, conditions could become uncomfortable quickly. Warm clothing, shelter, and vehicle heat were important factors in remaining stationary for long periods. No evidence suggests that Kemp encountered another vehicle or individual along this corridor before reaching Wagon Hound. No motorists later reported assisting him or observing unusual behavior. Traffic camera systems were not installed in this region at the time. Rest area maintenance logs indicate that Wagon Hound facilities were inspected periodically. No unusual damage or disturbances were recorded in the days before the discovery of Kemp's vehicle. Investigators reviewing this portion of the route focused on environmental constraints. Limited services, long distances between towns, and rapidly changing weather reduced opportunities for assistance and documentation. Movement along the corridor left few permanent records. The highway itself offered a clear, continuous path westward. Departing from it required intentional movement onto secondary roads or open land. Such departures were uncommon among through travelers without specific destinations. By the time Kemp's vehicle was located near Wagon Hound, this corridor had already erased many potential traces. Wind, traffic, and routine maintenance altered surface conditions. Only the immediate area around the rest stop retained visible evidence. Records from transportation, weather, and law enforcement agencies show that Interstate 80 functioned normally during this period. There were no major disruptions, closures, or emergencies. Travel conditions were challenging, but not exceptional. The open ground, beyond the fence line, north of the Wagon Hound rest area, the terrain shifts quickly from maintained highway property to open rangeland. The paved access road ends within a short distance, giving way to dirt tracks, wire fencing, and unmarked pasture. In 1982, this land was used primarily for cattle grazing and seasonal hay production. Public access was limited, though no physical barriers prevented movement across most sections. Topographic maps from the period show a gradual rise in elevation moving north from Interstate 80. The land is shaped by shallow draws and low ridges formed by drainage patterns. These features are subtle when viewed from a vehicle, but become more apparent on foot. Small depressions collect snow and water, while exposed ridges remain windswept. Vegetation in the area consisted mainly of short grasses, sagebrush, and scattered shrubs. Tree cover was minimal. During winter months, most plant growth was dormant. Ground cover offered little protection from wind and provided few visual landmarks. In light snow, footprints could remain visible for several hours if conditions were calm. Property ownership records indicate that several ranches controlled large tracts north of Wagon Hound. Fences marked boundaries, though gates were often left unsecured to allow livestock movement. These fences created linear obstacles that travelers on foot would have to climb over or walk around. The abandoned barn, identified during the early search, stood on privately owned land approximately 4 miles from the rest area. County records list the structure as part of a former livestock operation that ceased active use in the 1960s. By 1982, the building was no longer maintained. Photographs taken during later investigations show the barn as a wooden frame structure with partial roof collapse and missing boards along the walls. Openings in the siding allowed wind and snow to enter freely. The interior floor was dirt, with scattered debris from decades of use. Searchers reported that the structure offered limited shelter from wind, but little insulation from cold. It could block direct exposure in one direction, depending on wind patterns, but did not retain heat. Any person inside would remain subject to ambient temperatures. Land survey maps indicate several other deteriorating outbuildings within a 5-mile radius of the barn. Most were in similar condition, used intermittently for storage or abandoned entirely. Some were partially hidden by terrain and not visible from major routes. During November, livestock presence in this area was reduced. Many ranchers moved cattle to lower or sheltered pastures before winter. As a result, human activity in the fields decreased. Fewer workers and vehicles passed through the area during this period. Snow cover on open ground varied widely. Wind redistributed snowfall, creating alternating bare patches and compacted drifts. In exposed zones, footprints could fade quickly. In sheltered areas, tracks sometimes remained intact for days. Carbon County search records describe the tracking conditions as mixed. Some portions of the footprint trail were sharply defined, while others required interpretation. Searchers relied on continuity and alignment rather than depth alone. Beyond the barn, terrain becomes more irregular. Low ridges intersect with shallow valleys, and several seasonal streams cut through the prairie. In winter, these channels were often frozen or partially snow-covered, making them difficult to identify without close inspection. Aerial photographs from the early 1980s show no major roads north of Wagon Hound, beyond ranch access paths. These dirt routes were used primarily for livestock management and equipment transport. Their maintenance depended on seasonal conditions and landowner activity. Search teams reported following the footprints until they reached an area where snow coverage became inconsistent. In several locations, grass protruded through thin layers of snow. In others, wind had smoothed the surface. At these points, track definition weakened. Investigators later consulted soil and climate specialists to understand how quickly footprints could degrade. Reports indicated that moderate wind could obscure shallow impressions within hours. Temperature fluctuations also affected surface texture, especially during daytime thaw and nighttime refreeze cycles. Wildlife activity further altered ground conditions. Antelope, deer, and small mammals moved through the area regularly. Their tracks overlapped human footprints in some locations, complicating interpretation. Some sections showed heavy animal traffic. Ranchers interviewed during later reviews stated that cattle occasionally wandered near the abandoned barn, especially when shelter was needed. Hoofprints and disturbed soil were common in that vicinity. These disturbances increased after storms. Search operations in open prairie required careful coordination. Teams spaced themselves to maintain visual contact. Markers were placed to record track locations. Flagging tape was used in some areas to document verified sections of the trail. Communication between searchers relied on portable radios with limited range. Signal strength varied with terrain. In shallow valleys, transmission was sometimes unreliable. Teams were instructed to return regularly to central points for updates. Helicopters were not immediately available during the initial phase. Fixed-wing aircraft conducted broad scans, but their altitude limited ground resolution. Small objects or individuals lying down would be difficult to detect from above. Ground searches were conducted primarily during daylight hours. Night operations were limited due to safety concerns and reduced visibility. Artificial lighting was insufficient for detailed tracking across uneven terrain. Temperature records from nearby weather stations show that nighttime lows during this period often fell below freezing. Wind chill values increased exposure risk. Prolonged outdoor activity without adequate shelter or clothing would have been physically demanding. Personal items recovered near the barn included socks and small objects associated with Kemp. Their placement did not clearly indicate long-term occupancy. Investigators recorded their positions and collected them for analysis. No campfire remnants were documented at the site. The small arrangement of sticks reported by searchers did not show evidence of burning. Soil samples did not contain ash or charcoal residue. Search leaders noted that the area beyond the barn offered multiple directions of travel. A person could move north toward higher ground, east toward shallow valleys, or west toward fence lines and ranch roads. Without tracks, determining a route became speculative. Efforts to locate additional impressions included probing snow with poles and examining shaded areas where preservation might be better. These methods produced limited results. No continuous trail was identified beyond the structure. Landowners cooperated with search efforts by granting access to property and providing maps. Some assisted informally by riding horseback along fence lines and checking out buildings. Despite these efforts, large portions of the surrounding prairie remained unsearched in detail. The scale of the area and limited manpower restricted coverage. Priority was given to zones closest to the known track line. Search documentation emphasizes the difficulty of maintaining orientation in uniform terrain. Without prominent landmarks, teams relied heavily on compass bearings and reference points marked on maps. No personal belongings, clothing, or biological evidence attributed to Kemp were recovered beyond the barn area. Subsequent searches in later years produced similar results. Environmental assessments concluded that natural processes likely altered surface conditions rapidly. Wind, animal movement, and temperature variation combined to reduce trace visibility within short periods. The prairie north of Wagon Hound therefore presented a setting where physical evidence was easily lost. Movement across it left few durable markers. Once the footprint trail ended, reconstruction depended almost entirely on interpretation, radio logs, and the assembly of search teams. When Paul Donald Kemp Jr.'s vehicle was reported abandoned near the Wagon Hound rest area, Carbon County law enforcement initiated standard missing person procedures. Initial coordination was handled through the county sheriff's office in Rawlins, which maintained responsibility for highway patrol and rural response. Dispatch records show that multiple units were notified within the first hour after the discovery. The first phase of organization relied on on-duty deputies and available supervisors. At the time, Carbon County employed a limited number of sworn officers, many of whom covered large geographic areas. Staffing levels were adjusted by recalling off-duty personnel and extending scheduled shifts. These changes were documented in internal duty rosters. Radio communication formed the central coordination system. Deputies used VHF radios connected through regional repeaters. Signal coverage was generally reliable along Interstate 80, but weakened in low-lying terrain north of Wagon Hound. Dispatchers maintained continuous contact with field units when possible. A temporary command point was established near the rest area. Patrol vehicles were positioned to provide lighting and shelter. Maps, notebooks, and radio equipment were gathered there. Supervisors used this location to assign tasks and track personnel movement. Search operations were divided into functional groups. One group remained near the vehicle to document evidence and manage access. Another followed the visible footprints northward. Additional personnel were tasked with perimeter patrol and roadway monitoring. These assignments were adjusted as conditions changed. Evidence handling followed established procedures. The vehicle was photographed and inspected before being moved. Items found nearby were logged and secured. Reports show that deputies recorded clothing locations, door position, engine status, and weather conditions at the time of discovery. The sheriff's office requested assistance from neighboring agencies within 24 hours. Personnel from Albany County and Sweetwater County were contacted. Wyoming Highway Patrol units also provided support. Interagency cooperation was facilitated through existing mutual aid agreements. Volunteer participation began shortly after the initial law enforcement response. Local residents, ranch workers, and members of community organizations offered assistance. Volunteers were registered at the command point and assigned to supervised search teams. Their participation was documented in daily activity logs. Search leaders emphasized maintaining accountability. Each team reported departure and return times. Areas covered were marked on printed maps. Handwritten notes recorded weather changes, ground conditions, and any observed disturbances. Training levels among participants varied. Deputies and highway patrol officers had basic search and rescue instruction. Volunteers often had no formal training. To address this, team leaders provided brief orientation sessions covering spacing, radio use, and safety procedures. Medical support was limited. A local ambulance service remained on standby in Rawlins. First aid kits were distributed to field teams. No serious injuries were reported during early operations, though several participants experienced cold exposure and fatigue. Resource availability shaped operational choices. Carbon County did not maintain a dedicated search and rescue unit at the time. Equipment such as thermal imaging devices, GPS units, and tracking dogs was not immediately accessible. Requests for specialized resources required state-level coordination. Canine units were considered, but not deployed during the earliest phase. Records indicate that officials discussed the possibility, but determined that snow and wind conditions might reduce effectiveness. Later reviews revisited this decision, but found no documentation showing that dogs were formally requested during the first days. Aerial support was provided through a small, fixed-wing aircraft, operated by a local pilot affiliated with law enforcement. Flight plans and observation notes were filed after each sortie. These reports focused on scanning open areas for movement, clothing, or unusual patterns in snow cover. Weather updates were obtained through National Weather Service bulletins and local monitoring. Dispatchers relayed wind and temperature changes to field units. Operations were adjusted when visibility decreased or wind intensified. Search scheduling followed daylight availability. Major ground operations occurred between mid-morning and late afternoon. Night activity was restricted to patrol monitoring and equipment preparation. Field commanders cited safety concerns and reduced effectiveness after dark. Documentation procedures required deputies to submit written reports after each shift. These reports included areas searched, personnel involved, and observations. Copies were stored in case files maintained by the sheriff's office. Media inquiries began within days of the disappearance. Local newspapers and radio stations contacted the sheriff's office for updates. A designated spokesperson provided brief factual statements. Press releases avoided speculation and focused on confirmed activities. Family liaison responsibilities were assigned to a senior deputy. Communication with Kemp's relatives was conducted by telephone and letter. Records show that updates were provided periodically as searches progressed. Family members were informed of major developments and setbacks. Financial resources for the search came primarily from county funds. Overtime payments, fuel costs, and equipment use were tracked. Some expenses were later reimbursed through state emergency assistance programs. Budget summaries included line items related to the operation. Decision-making authority rested with the county sheriff, advised by senior deputies and external consultants when available. Meetings were held at regular intervals to review progress and revise strategies. Notes from these meetings outlined shifting priorities based on evidence availability. One early decision involved expanding the search radius beyond the immediate footprint trail. This expansion required additional personnel and transportation. Vehicles were assigned to access remote areas using ranch roads and tracks. Landowner cooperation was essential. Ranchers granted access to property and provided guidance on terrain and structures. Some offered equipment such as horses and utility vehicles. These contributions were acknowledged in internal correspondence. Operational challenges included uneven communication coverage, limited manpower, and rapidly changing weather. Supervisors noted that maintaining consistent coverage across large areas was difficult. Teams were frequently reassigned to fill gaps. Search leaders also addressed the possibility of false leads. Reports of potential sightings or objects were investigated and documented. Most were determined to be unrelated. Procedures required verification before reallocating resources. As days passed without new physical evidence, coordination shifted toward longer-term planning. Officials discussed the feasibility of repeated searches, seasonal limitations, and cost implications. These discussions were recorded in administrative files. The structure of the operation reflected standard rural law enforcement practice at the time. Emphasis was placed on methodical coverage, record-keeping, and interagency cooperation. Advanced technological support was limited. Internal evaluations conducted later highlighted strengths and weaknesses. Strengths included rapid mobilization and community involvement. Limitations included resource constraints and dependence on environmental conditions. Throughout this phase, officials maintained a consistent approach focused on documented procedures. Decisions were framed in terms of available information, personnel safety, and logistical capacity. No formal suspension of the search occurred during the initial weeks. Instead, activity levels fluctuated based on weather, leads, and resource availability. Reduced operations were described as temporary adjustments rather than terminations. Records from this period show steady administrative activity alongside field operations. Correspondence, expense reports, and personnel schedules continued to be filed even when physical searching slowed. By the end of the first month, coordination efforts had produced extensive documentation, but limited new evidence. The operation had transitioned from intensive response to sustained monitoring. Statements filed and sightings logged. In the weeks after the vehicle was discovered near Wagon Hound, the Carbon County Sheriff's Office began receiving information from outside the immediate search area. Most of it did not come from physical evidence, but from individuals who believed they had crossed paths with a man matching Paul Donald Kemp Jr.'s description. These contacts were entered into official logs and reviewed in sequence. Telephone calls formed the largest portion of incoming reports. Dispatch records show that callers often referenced newspaper articles or radio broadcasts that described the disappearance. After those publications circulated, the number of reported sightings increased. Deputies recorded each call with the name of the reporting party, the time of the alleged encounter, and the specific location. Many reports originated from motorists traveling along Interstate 80. Drivers described seeing a man walking westbound on the shoulder, standing near exit ramps, or resting near fence lines. Most of these descriptions were general and did not include facial features. Clothing, color, and approximate height were often the only details provided. One early report came from a truck driver who contacted authorities several days after the disappearance. He stated that he observed a man walking alone between mile markers west of Wagon Hound. The driver did not stop and could not confirm identity. Deputies noted the report and checked the area without finding supporting evidence. A service station employee in Rawlins reported that a man resembling Kemp entered briefly to request directions. The employee described the individual as quiet and somewhat fatigued. No receipt or written record linked Kemp to that location, and no additional witnesses confirmed the encounter. Several sightings were reported outside Carbon County. In Albany County, a motorist believed he had seen Kemp near Laramie. The description included a man carrying no visible luggage and walking with steady pace. Deputies investigated, but did not locate anyone matching the account. In Sweetwater County, a ranch worker stated that he encountered a man near an outbuilding who asked about distances to nearby towns. The ranch worker later contacted authorities after seeing a news report. Investigators visited the property, but found no evidence that Kemp had been present. Reports also came from neighboring states. Law enforcement agencies in Colorado, Utah, and Montana forwarded tips from individuals who believed they had seen a man resembling Kemp in roadside diners or along secondary highways. These agencies compared the descriptions with distributed photographs, but did not confirm a match. At the time of his disappearance, Kemp was described as approximately 6 feet tall, with brown hair and average build. He had no highly distinctive markings. Investigators recognized that such features were common among adult males in the region, which complicated visual identification. Photographs of Kemp were reproduced and distributed to regional law enforcement departments. Copies were placed in public buildings and mailed to agencies in adjacent states. Media outlets also published his image alongside basic, descriptive information. Each reported sighting was assigned a case reference number. Deputies recorded whether the report involved direct interaction, visual observation at distance, or second-hand information. Follow-up actions were noted in writing. In several instances, individuals initially believed to match Kemp's description were identified as other travelers. Some were seasonal laborers moving between ranches. Others were hitchhikers or individuals without permanent residence who regularly traveled along highways. Hospitals in Wyoming and nearby states were asked to review admissions records for unidentified patients. No entries matching Kemp's description were located. Medical examiners were also contacted regarding unidentified remains in the region, with negative results. Railroad authorities reviewed incident logs and employee reports. Freight trains operated parallel to sections of Interstate 80, and transient travel by rail was not uncommon in the early 1980s. No records indicated that Kemp had boarded or been encountered along rail lines. Several reports referenced individuals asking for rides westward. However, no driver later confirmed providing transportation to Kemp. Law enforcement interviewed those who claimed to have picked up hitchhikers in the area. None identified him as a passenger. Some sightings involved individuals seen sleeping in sheds, culverts, or abandoned structures. Deputies inspected these locations where possible. Personal items recovered from such sites did not correspond with Kemp's belongings. Investigators evaluated reports using criteria, including time proximity, detail specificity, and corroboration. Reports made shortly after the disappearance were given higher priority. Vague descriptions received limited follow-up. Weather conditions influenced the assessment of certain accounts. Extended travel on foot in winter required protection from wind and cold. Reports suggesting prolonged exposure were reviewed in relation to recorded temperatures. Internal memoranda from the sheriff's office indicate that resource limitations required selective follow-up. Deputies prioritized reports within Carbon County and those supported by multiple witnesses. Some callers described clothing similar to items found near Kemp's vehicle. However, such clothing was widely available and did not provide reliable identification. Family members occasionally received messages from individuals claiming knowledge of Kemp's location. These communications were forwarded to authorities. Investigations into these claims did not produce substantiated leads. Public interest generated a mixture of sincere and speculative information. Law enforcement noted that increased media coverage correlated with higher call volume. Many reports lacked precise details or verifiable timelines. The centralized log of sightings grew steadily during the first year. Each entry was preserved regardless of reliability. Officials retained these records for potential comparison with future information. By the mid-1980s, the number of new reports declined. Periodic anniversaries or renewed media coverage briefly increased activity, but no verified sighting emerged. No physical evidence accompanied any reported encounter. No photographs, receipts, or written documents linked Kemp to locations beyond Wagonhound. All sightings remained dependent on memory. Case documentation reflects a consistent pattern. Reports were received, recorded, evaluated, and either pursued or closed. This process continued for years without producing confirmation of post-disappearance movement. Investigators concluded that while public reports demonstrated awareness and engagement, they did not establish a verified timeline after November 16. The official record therefore remained anchored to the location where the vehicle was found, personal files and mail that went unclaimed. After field searches and public tip collection slowed, investigators shifted attention toward materials connected to Paul Donald Kemp Jr.'s daily life before his disappearance. These materials included employment records, banking statements, correspondence, and personal documents recovered from his vehicle and residence. Officials reviewed them to establish routine behavior and long-term planning patterns. Kemp's employment history was reconstructed through personnel files and interviews with former supervisors. Records showed that he had worked in advertising and promotional media in the eastern United States. His positions involved client coordination, scheduling, and occasional travel. Performance evaluations did not indicate disciplinary problems or unexplained absences. Tax documents and payroll statements confirmed steady income during the 2 years preceding the trip. No abrupt termination or financial dispute was recorded. His departure from his most recent position occurred several months before the journey and was described by management as voluntary. Bank statements were obtained through legal request. These showed regular deposits and withdrawals consistent with personal expenses. Rent payments, insurance premiums, and utility bills were paid on schedule. No unusual transactions were identified in the months leading up to November 1982. Credit card records reflected purchases related to travel, including fuel, food, lodging, and vehicle maintenance. Spending patterns did not change significantly before the trip. There were no large cash advances or unexplained charges. Personal mail was collected from Kemp's residence and forwarded to family members after he was reported missing. Some letters remained unopened for extended periods. Utility notices, subscription renewals, and personal correspondence accumulated without response. Postal service records confirmed that forwarding instructions were not in place. Mail continued to be delivered to his registered address. Returned items were eventually marked undeliverable when payments lapsed. Several unopened envelopes contained routine financial statements and promotional material. Others included handwritten letters from friends. These letters referenced ordinary topics such as work changes, family events, and upcoming holidays. None contained urgent messages. Investigators reviewed address books and contact lists found among Kemp's belongings. Entries included relatives, co-workers, and acquaintances from previous residences. There were no unidentified contacts or coded references. Telephone billing records were examined for patterns. Calls were made primarily to family members and professional associates. Long-distance communication followed established habits. No sudden increase or decrease was observed prior to the trip. A small collection of personal notebooks was recovered from his residence. These contained appointment reminders, expense notes, and travel ideas. Some pages referenced possible future destinations and professional opportunities. None indicated plans to withdraw from social or financial obligations. Vehicle documents, including registration and insurance papers, were current. Renewal notices had been mailed shortly before his disappearance. No lapse in coverage was recorded at that time. Health insurance records showed active enrollment. Medical billing statements reflected routine care. There were no outstanding claims or disputes. Physicians contacted by investigators reported no recent concerns affecting travel capability. Rental agreements and lease documentation showed that Kemp maintained stable housing. The lease was in good standing, and no eviction proceedings were underway. Neighbors interviewed later stated that he had not mentioned plans to vacate. Employment correspondence included applications and inquiry letters sent to potential clients and employers. These were dated weeks before the trip and suggested interest in future work. Replies had not yet been received at the time he disappeared. Personal belongings left at his residence included clothing, books, and household items. No large-scale disposal or packing activity was observed. Family members stated that most possessions remained in place. Subscription services such as magazines and professional newsletters continued to deliver issues for months afterward. Publishers were later notified of his disappearance. Delivery ceased only after accounts were closed. Investigators contacted former co-workers to review recent interactions. Several recalled conversations about travel and possible business opportunities in Western states. None described statements indicating withdrawal from professional life. Insurance providers were asked to supply policy details. Life, auto, and health insurance policies were active. Beneficiary information had not been changed recently. Legal records showed no pending lawsuits, criminal charges, or civil disputes involving Kemp. Background checks produced no evidence of legal pressure. Financial planners and accountants associated with Kemp reported no unusual consultations. His accounts were managed routinely. No asset transfers were initiated before the trip. Family members provided copies of holiday cards and letters sent shortly before his departure. These messages were informal and consistent with past communication. None suggested imminent separation. Authorities also reviewed storage facility records in areas where Kemp had previously lived. No units were rented under his name. No property was placed in long-term storage. Employment agencies and professional associations were contacted. Memberships remained active. Renewal notices were sent but unanswered. The cumulative review of these materials indicated continuity rather than disruption. Personal, financial, and professional obligations were maintained up to the time of travel. Mail continued to arrive for years after the disappearance. Some items were preserved by family members. Others were discarded after review. Investigators periodically revisited these materials when new leads emerged. No documents were located that provided direct explanation for Kemp's actions near Wagonhound. Records reflected ordinary administrative life rather than preparation for absence. Reopened files and the return to old ground. During the late 1980s, Carbon County officials began periodic reviews of unresolved missing person cases, including the disappearance of Paul Donald Kemp Jr. These reviews were prompted by administrative policy and by inquiries from family members and outside agencies. Case files were retrieved from storage and examined for procedural gaps or overlooked material. The original investigation records consisted of handwritten reports, typed memoranda, photographs, maps, and radio logs. By that time, some documents had been transferred to microfilm. Others remained in paper folders stored in county archives. Clerks verified inventory lists before releasing files for review. One of the first steps in each review involved comparing early reports with later summaries. Investigators checked whether evidence had been logged correctly and whether follow-up actions were documented. In several instances, minor discrepancies in dates and names were noted and corrected. In 1989, the Sheriff's Office conducted a limited re-examination of the Wagonhound area. This effort involved deputies and local volunteers familiar with the terrain. The purpose was to determine whether erosion, construction, or land use changes had exposed new material. Landowners were contacted before the search. Permission was granted to access pastures, fence lines, and abandoned structures. Several properties had changed ownership since 1982, requiring updated agreements. Searches focused on areas near the original footprint trail and the abandoned barn. Metal detectors were used in selected locations to identify buried objects. Ground surveys were conducted along drainage channels where debris might collect. No new personal items attributable to Kemp were recovered. Objects located during the search were inspected and compared with inventory lists from the original investigation. Most were determined to be unrelated agricultural debris. During the early 1990s, state authorities introduced computerized record systems. Carbon County began digitizing portions of older case files. Kemp's file was partially converted, including basic identification data, dates, and incident summaries. This digitization allowed information to be shared more easily with other jurisdictions. His case was entered into regional and national missing person databases. Updates were transmitted periodically to ensure accuracy. In 1994, family members requested a formal status review. The Sheriff's Office prepared a written summary outlining known facts, investigative actions, and unresolved issues. A copy was provided to relatives and retained in administrative files. The review noted that no physical evidence had emerged since the initial search. It reaffirmed that all documented sightings remained unconfirmed. It also listed resources that had not been available during the early investigation, such as improved forensic techniques. During the late 1990s, Advances in forensic science prompted renewed interest in older cases. Officials consulted state laboratories regarding preserved evidence. Clothing and small items recovered in 1982 were evaluated for potential testing. At that time, DNA analysis required relatively large and uncontaminated samples. Most items associated with the case did not meet laboratory standards. Soil and fabric samples had degraded during storage. Photographs from the original search were scanned and enhanced using available software. Technicians adjusted contrast and brightness to clarify surface details. These efforts did not reveal additional information. In 2001, a multi-agency cold case initiative in Wyoming included Kemp's disappearance in a preliminary review. Analysts compared it with other unresolved cases involving roadside abandonments. No direct similarities were established. Investigators revisited highway patrol and transportation records from the early 1980s. Archived logs were reviewed for incidents that might have been overlooked. No additional references to Kemp's vehicle or license plate were found. During this period, several private organizations contacted the sheriff's office offering assistance. These included volunteer search groups and missing person advocacy organizations. Cooperation agreements were established for information sharing. One group conducted independent field surveys north of Wagonhound in 2003. Participants used handheld GPS devices to map search patterns. Data was provided to law enforcement for inclusion in case files. The survey focused on ravines, fence lines, and low visibility areas. Despite expanded coverage, no human remains or personal property were located. In 2006, highway reconstruction projects altered portions of Interstate 80 near Wagonhound. Before construction began, officials reviewed whether disturbed areas overlapped with original search zones. Contractors were instructed to report any findings. No relevant material was reported during the project. Construction records indicate that excavated soil was inspected visually, but not screened. Case reviews continued intermittently throughout the following decade. Each review followed a similar structure: document verification, evidence status check, and assessment of new investigative tools. In 2012, digital archiving allowed full conversion of Kemp's case file into electronic format. Scanned copies of reports and photographs were stored on secure servers. Access was limited to authorized personnel. This conversion facilitated remote consultation with specialists. Analysts from state and federal agencies reviewed summaries and offered procedural feedback. None identified unexamined evidence with clear investigative potential. Family members maintained periodic contact with authorities. Correspondence files include letters requesting updates and expressing interest in renewed searches. Officials responded with formal statements outlining ongoing status. Public interest was periodically renewed through television programs and online forums. Following such broadcasts, additional tips were submitted. These were logged and evaluated according to standard procedures. Most post-broadcast tips repeated earlier claims or referenced distant locations without documentation. Investigators compared them against existing records and closed them when no corroboration emerged. In 2017, unmanned aerial vehicle technology became available for limited law enforcement use. Discussions were held regarding possible aerial surveys of remote prairie areas. Resource constraints delayed implementation. A small drone survey was eventually conducted in 2019. Operators focused on areas near seasonal waterways and eroded slopes. High-resolution imagery was reviewed for anomalies. The imagery showed natural formations, animal remains, and agricultural debris. No features consistent with human remains or personal belongings were identified. Throughout these years, administrative evaluations emphasized record preservation. Climate-controlled storage was used for remaining physical evidence. Digital backups were maintained off-site. Investigators involved in later reviews often had no personal connection to the original search. Their assessments relied entirely on documentation. Training materials for cold case review were applied systematically. Internal memoranda from 2021 indicate that Kemp's case remained classified as open but inactive. Activity depended on new information or technological developments. Officials noted that continued monitoring of unidentified remains databases was standard practice. Periodic cross-checks were conducted. No matches were found. Reopened inquiries did not change the central factual framework established in 1982. The vehicle location, footprint trail, and barn site remained the only confirmed physical anchors. Later searches and reviews expanded coverage and documentation. but did not alter the evidentiary record. Each effort produced detailed reports that were added to the file. The accumulation of reopened files and repeated fieldwork reflected ongoing institutional responsibility. The case remained part of official records rather than being formally closed. Print columns, broadcast segments, and online archives. Local reporting on the disappearance of Paul Donald Kemp Jr. began within days of the discovery of his vehicle near Wagonhound. Newspapers in Rawlins, Laramie, and Cheyenne published brief notices based on sheriff's office statements. These early articles focused on confirmed details, including the location of the vehicle, the date of discovery, and the request for public assistance. The Rawlins Daily Times printed one of the first extended accounts in late November 1982. The article summarized search efforts, weather conditions, and contact information for the sheriff's office. It did not include speculation. Similar reports appeared in the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle and smaller regional publications. Radio stations in southeastern Wyoming provided short updates during news segments. These broadcasts typically repeated information from written press releases. Listeners were encouraged to report possible sightings. Station archives indicate that coverage was intermittent and depended on search activity. Television attention increased when regional news outlets began covering the case. Reporters from Denver and Salt Lake City visited Carbon County during the early search period. Their segments included footage of the rest area, patrol vehicles, and open prairie. Interviews were conducted with deputies and search coordinators. Broadcast transcripts show that early television reports followed official statements closely. Reporters avoided presenting unverified theories. Most segments were less than 2 minutes in length and appeared within general news programs. In 1984, a nationally syndicated television series featuring unsolved disappearances included Kemp's case. Producers relied on interviews with family members and law enforcement. The program presented reenactments of the roadside scene and the footprint trail. Production notes indicate that some details were simplified for broadcast. The identity of responding officers and the sequence of events were adjusted to fit narrative structure. However, core facts remained consistent with official records. After the broadcast, the sheriff's office received a noticeable increase in public tips. Correspondence files show that many callers referenced the program. Most of these tips duplicated earlier reports or involved distant locations. Print magazines specializing in true crime and unexplained events began referencing the case in the late 1980s. These articles summarized publicly available information and cited newspaper and television sources. Some included speculative language, not present in official reports. By the early 1990s, the case appeared in compiled reference books on missing persons. These entries were brief and relied on secondary sources. Errors in dates and distances appeared in some editions, leading to inconsistencies in later citations. With the expansion of internet access in the late 1990s, online discussion forums began hosting threads about Kemp's disappearance. Users shared scanned articles, personal theories, and unverified claims. Moderation policies varied across platforms. Early online archives preserved copies of newspaper articles and broadcast summaries. These archives allowed users to access material that was previously difficult to obtain. Law enforcement agencies occasionally consulted these resources to track circulating information. Websites dedicated to unsolved cases included profiles of Kemp. These profiles often combined official details with information from family interviews. Some sites corrected earlier errors, others repeated inaccuracies. Digital versions of newspaper archives became available in the 2000 era. Researchers and journalists accessed original articles to verify timelines. This led to minor revisions in some online summaries. Podcast programs covering historical disappearances discussed the case beginning in the 2010s. Episode transcripts show that hosts relied heavily on archival material. Some programs interviewed former deputies and family members. Social media platforms later amplified these discussions. Posts sharing photographs and summaries circulated periodically, especially on anniversaries. These posts generated renewed interest, but rarely produced new evidence. Law enforcement agencies monitored major online platforms for actionable information. Tips received through email and online forms were logged alongside traditional reports. Most repeated earlier claims. Family members expressed mixed views about media coverage in correspondence. Some appreciated continued attention. Others raised concerns about inaccuracies. These communications were preserved in case files. Journalistic standards influenced presentation. Local outlets maintained factual tone. National and specialized programs sometimes emphasized unusual elements for audience engagement. This difference affected public perception. Editors and producers occasionally contacted the sheriff's office to verify details. Records show that officials provided summaries and corrected errors when identified. Not all publications incorporated these corrections. Over time, multiple versions of the narrative circulated. Some emphasized environmental factors, others focused on the footprint trail or later sightings. These variations reflected source selection rather than new evidence. Academic researchers studying missing person cases cited Kemp's disappearance in broader analyses. These references were based on compiled datasets and did not involve original field investigation. Archival preservation efforts ensured that original articles and broadcasts remained accessible. Libraries and historical societies in Wyoming maintained microfilm and digital collections. The cumulative effect of media coverage was the creation of a layered public record. Early reports formed the foundation. Later retellings added interpretation and, occasionally, distortion. Despite repeated attention, no verified information emerged through media channels. All confirmed facts continued to trace back to official records from 1982, case numbers, laboratory forms, and cross-reference reviews. As the investigation continued into later decades, authorities increasingly relied on forensic record systems to determine whether unidentified human remains found elsewhere might correspond to Paul Donald Kemp Jr. This process involved coordination between county officials, medical examiners, and state and federal agencies responsible for missing person registries. During the early 1980s, Wyoming did not maintain a centralized, computerized system for unidentified remains. Records were kept locally by county coroners and medical examiners. These files included basic descriptions, estimated age ranges, clothing inventories, and locations of discovery. Information was shared through mailed reports and telephone inquiries. Carbon County officials contacted surrounding jurisdictions to request reviews of unidentified remains cases from the years following Kemp's disappearance. Coroners in Albany, Sweetwater, and Natrona counties provided summaries of relevant records. None matched Kemp's physical description or known characteristics. In 1987, Wyoming began participating in regional information exchanges that allowed law enforcement agencies to compare missing person reports more efficiently. Kemp's identifying data, including height, age, hair color, and dental history, was entered into these systems. Dental records were obtained from Kemp's former providers in Maryland. These included charts, x-rays, and treatment notes. Copies were forwarded to forensic offices upon request. Dentition was considered one of the most reliable identification tools available at the time. Medical examiner offices in neighboring states were asked to review unidentified remains cases involving adult males of similar age. Reports were exchanged with offices in Colorado, Utah, and Montana. Each comparison was documented in correspondence files. During the 1990s, the Federal Bureau of Investigation expanded its missing person databases. Kemp's case was entered into national systems that allowed broader cross-referencing. Updates were submitted periodically to reflect new investigative actions. Forensic anthropologists consulted during later reviews examined whether skeletal remains found in remote areas could plausibly match Kemp's profile. Age estimation, stature reconstruction, and trauma assessment were used in these evaluations. None produced a positive association. In 2000, the National Crime Information Center expanded its missing person files to include unidentified remains entries. Carbon County staff ensured that Kemp's profile remained current within the system. Photographs and descriptive notes were updated when available. The introduction of the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System in the 2010 era marked a significant change in case comparison procedures. Kemp's case file was uploaded into this database, including dental records, personal descriptors, and circumstances of disappearance. This system allowed automated searches against unidentified remains entries nationwide. Analysts conducted periodic reviews to check for potential matches. Each potential correlation was evaluated manually by forensic specialists. Several tentative matches were generated over time based on age range and general appearance. These were reviewed by comparing dental records and, when available, DNA samples. All were ruled out. Biological material associated with Kemp was limited. No preserved blood samples or personal grooming items were available for genetic reference. Family members later provided DNA samples to support future comparison efforts. These samples were entered into national databases, When unidentified remains with viable genetic material were processed, automated comparisons were conducted. No confirmed match emerged. Medical examiner officers also reviewed archived case files involving remains discovered near Interstate 80 and adjacent rail corridors. Investigators focused on locations that aligned with possible travel routes. None corresponded with Kemp's known profile. Some remains discovered decades later were initially considered candidates due to geographic proximity. Detailed analysis typically eliminated these possibilities based on age, injury patterns, or personal effects. Clothing found with unidentified remains was compared with descriptions of items associated with Kemp. Investigators reviewed brand labels, sizing, and manufacturing dates. No consistent overlap was found. Fingerprint comparison was limited by the availability of records. Kemp's fingerprints were not stored in criminal databases. No complete fingerprint file was available for cross-checking. Case files show repeated exchanges between Carbon County and forensic agencies. Letters and emails documented requests for confirmation and notification of negative results. These communications continued intermittently for decades. Periodic audits of unidentified remains databases were conducted by state authorities. Kemp's case was included in these audits to ensure that information remained accurate and searchable. Training materials for forensic investigators reference the importance of maintaining long-term comparisons in unresolved cases. Kemp's file was used as an example of sustained cross-referencing procedures. Technological improvements increased the speed of analysis, but did not alter outcomes. Digital imaging, improved DNA extraction methods, and expanded databases produced more comparisons, but no identification. Investigators noted that environmental exposure in prairie and desert regions often degraded biological material. This limited the usefulness of some remains for advanced testing. Administrative reviews emphasized documentation. Each comparison attempt was recorded, including dates, agencies involved, and conclusions. These records formed part of the permanent case archive. Family members were informed when significant reviews were conducted. Notification letters summarized procedures and results without technical detail. Correspondence reflects ongoing cooperation. By the 2020s, Kemp's profile had been compared against thousands of unidentified remains entries. Automated systems continued to perform routine matching functions. No forensic examination produced evidence linking any unidentified individual to Kemp. All verified remains comparisons resulted in exclusion. The process relied on standardized forms, laboratory protocols, and interagency reporting. Each step followed established forensic guidelines. These comparisons became a permanent element of case management. They represented a continuing effort to resolve identification questions through systematic review. Despite technological advances, the absence of matching biological or dental evidence remained unchanged. The official record reflected repeated negative findings, letters sent, replies filed, and ongoing requests. From the months following Paul Donald Kemp Jr.'s disappearance onward, his family maintained regular communication with law enforcement agencies. This communication was preserved through letters, official forms, and later, electronic correspondence. These materials form a separate section within the case archive. Initial contact between the family and Carbon County officials occurred by telephone and written mail. Deputies provided basic information regarding search efforts and advised relatives on reporting procedures. Follow-up letters summarized known facts and outlined available points of contact. During the first year, Kemp's mother and siblings sent periodic inquiries requesting updates. These letters often referenced specific reports or media items. They asked whether new searches were planned and whether additional leads had been evaluated. The sheriff's office responded with formal replies prepared by supervisory staff. These replies followed standardized language. They acknowledged receipt of correspondence, restated confirmed information, and explained current investigative status. Copies of outgoing letters were retained in administrative files. Marginal notes sometimes indicated when telephone conversations supplemented written responses. These notes recorded dates, participants, and general topics discussed. In the mid-1980s, family members requested access to selected portions of the case file. Legal counsel advised on disclosure limits. Redacted copies of reports were provided in accordance with state public records laws. Petitions submitted by relatives in 1986 and 1991 requested renewed field searches and expanded forensic review. These petitions were reviewed internally and discussed at supervisory meetings. Written responses outlined logistical and financial considerations. Correspondence shows that family members also contacted state officials, including the Wyoming Attorney General's office and the Department of Criminal Investigation. These agencies forwarded inquiries to Carbon County with requests for status confirmation. Several letters expressed concern about perceived inconsistencies in public reporting. Relatives requested clarification regarding officer names, distances, and timelines. Investigators reviewed original reports and provided written explanations when possible. In the 1990s, communication increasingly included advocacy organizations. Missing person support groups assisted the family in preparing formal requests and media statements. Copies of these communications were shared with local authorities. Meeting records indicate that family representatives occasionally met with investigators in person. These meetings were documented through memoranda summarizing discussion points and follow-up commitments. During the 2000 era, email replaced much traditional correspondence. Digital copies of messages were printed and added to case files. Electronic logs tracked response times and content. Relatives periodically requested confirmation that Kemp's profile remained active in national databases. Officials provided documentation showing continued inclusion and update schedules. Some correspondence involved practical matters, such as retrieval of personal property and management of financial accounts. Law enforcement coordinated with probate courts and legal representatives to address these issues. Anniversary dates often prompted renewed contact. Letters sent in November of various years requested summaries of investigative activity. Responses typically reiterated that no new evidence had emerged. Internal policy required designated officers to handle family communication. This role rotated as personnel changed. Training materials emphasized maintaining neutral tone and factual accuracy. Family members also contacted congressional offices seeking assistance. Congressional staff forwarded inquiries to state and county agencies. These requests were answered through formal administrative channels. Several letters discussed the possibility of independent searches funded by private donations. Officials reviewed these proposals for safety and legal compliance. Limited cooperation agreements were established in some instances. Records show that investigators occasionally provided families with copies of newly digitized photographs or maps. These materials were accompanied by explanatory notes. In later years, relatives requested participation in case review meetings. While direct involvement in operational decisions was limited, officials provided briefings on procedures and findings. Correspondence files include handwritten notes from family members, expressing appreciation for continued attention. Others conveyed frustration with lack of resolution. All were acknowledged in official replies. Legal advisors reviewed communications to ensure compliance with privacy regulations. Sensitive information regarding witnesses and informants was withheld. The volume of correspondence declined gradually over time, but never ceased entirely. Periodic contact continued into the 2020s. Administrative summaries describe family advocacy as consistent and organized. Officials noted that relatives maintained detailed personal records parallel to official files. Communication practices reflected broader institutional standards. Responses emphasized documented actions rather than interpretation. Status codes, file custody, and ongoing review. Within the records of the Carbon County Sheriff's Office, the disappearance of Paul Donald Kemp Jr. has been maintained under an open but inactive classification for several decades. This status reflects the absence of new physical evidence, combined with continued eligibility for review if additional information becomes available. The designation has remained unchanged since the late 1980s. Case management procedures required that unresolved files be preserved in secure storage. Kemp's original reports, photographs, correspondence, and evidence inventories were placed in archival containers and stored in climate-controlled facilities. Access was restricted to authorized personnel. Each retrieval was logged. During the 1990s, administrative guidelines for long-term investigations were updated. These guidelines outlined minimum review intervals and documentation standards. Kemp's file was included in these schedules. Supervisors conducted periodic inspections to verify completeness. Annual or biennial reviews involved confirming that identifying information remained accurate in state and federal systems. Deputies assigned to records management checked database entries and submitted corrections if necessary. These reviews were documented in internal memoranda. When digital record-keeping expanded in the early 2000 era, Kemp's file was converted into electronic format. Scanned copies of handwritten notes, maps, and photographs were stored on secure servers. Redundant backups were created at off-site locations. File conversion included indexing each document by date, author, and subject. This allowed later investigators to retrieve materials efficiently. Metadata records show that the conversion process was completed in stages over several years. Administrative oversight required that evidence inventories be reconciled regularly. Physical items associated with the case were inspected for preservation status. Containers were replaced when deterioration was noted. Labels were updated to match electronic records. Policies governing cold cases emphasized continuity. Even when active investigations ceased, designated officers remained responsible for file maintenance. Responsibility for Kemp's case transferred multiple times as personnel changed. Internal training materials for new deputies referenced long-term cases as examples of documentation practices. Kemp's file was used to illustrate standardized reporting and archiving procedures. Budgetary reports show modest annual allocations for archival management. These funds covered storage, digitization, and limited review activities. No separate investigative budget was maintained after the early 1990s. Requests for file access under public records, that statutes were processed through legal counsel. Redacted copies were prepared when permitted. Logs show multiple requests from journalists, researchers, and advocacy organizations. Each release required verification that sensitive information was protected. Names of informants, personal identifiers, and certain internal evaluations were withheld in accordance with policy. State oversight agencies periodically audited county record systems. Audit reports from 2005, 2012, and 2019 noted that Kemp's case file met retention and documentation standards. Interagency coordination remained part of routine administration. Updates were exchanged with national missing person registries. Automated systems continued to monitor unidentified remains databases for potential matches. When technological changes occurred, such as database migrations or software upgrades, Kemp's profile was reviewed for compatibility. Data fields were adjusted to conform to updated formats. Supervisory notes indicate that each review cycle followed a similar structure. Files were examined for missing documents. Evidence logs were compared against storage records. Database entries were verified. No review identified unexamined material with clear investigative value. Administrative summaries consistently reported that available documentation had been thoroughly analyzed. The sheriff's office maintained a written classification system for unresolved cases. Kemp's file remained listed under missing adult, circumstances undetermined. No reclassification occurred. Legal advisors periodically reviewed the file to ensure compliance with evolving privacy and disclosure regulations. Recommendations were incorporated into record-keeping practices. Correspondence with family members was retained alongside investigative records. Administrative staff ensured that communication histories were preserved as part of the permanent file. In later years, electronic systems allowed remote consultation with state and federal analysts. Case summaries were shared securely when requested. These consultations focused on procedural review rather than field investigation. Internal evaluations emphasized that ongoing monitoring depended on information flow rather than active searching. Officials noted that new evidence would be required to justify renewed operations. County policy required that inactive cases be revisited when significant technological advances occurred. Reviews were conducted following the introduction of expanded DNA databases and digital mapping tools. These reviews did not alter case status. Archival management also included physical preservation of photographic negatives and original maps. Specialized storage materials were used to prevent deterioration. Administrative correspondence reflects an emphasis on continuity. Officials described the case as part of institutional responsibility rather than a closed historical matter. Training documents stressed that unresolved cases must remain accessible and organized regardless of age. Kemp's file was cited as an example of long-term retention. Over time, personnel changes altered direct familiarity with the original investigation. Later administrators relied entirely on recorded material. No first-hand operational knowledge remained within the department. Periodic summaries prepared for internal use restated the same core facts. Vehicle located near Wagon Hound, footprints leading north, trail ending near a barn, no confirmed sightings. No physical evidence recovered afterward. These summaries were updated only to reflect administrative actions, such as database entries or archival changes. Substantive findings remained unchanged. State and county retention schedules require that such files be preserved indefinitely. Kemp's case, therefore, remains part of active archival systems rather than historical collections. As of the most recent administrative review, the file continues to be maintained under established protocols. Access logs, preservation records, and database confirmations are current. No formal closure has been issued. The classification remains open, inactive, and subject to review. Within the record system, the case exists as a sequence of documents rather than a resolved event. Each report, letter, and form remains in place, organized and preserved. The file continues to be checked, updated, and carried forward through administrative processes. Its status is defined not by conclusions, but by the continued maintenance of the same verified facts, preserved in official custody, awaiting information that has not yet appeared. If this case caught your attention, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know what details stood out to you the most. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.